everybody, Steven here. I'm back after a long break or because of the holidays and such. So today I'm planning to talk about, or at least one of several short videos about superhero squad. That would be these guys right here. I do have one of their games that was for PS3 way back 2010, I believe. So there was also a cartoon series based on these guys that had about a few seasons, and the Infinity Gauntlet was one part of the cartoon series story, and Infinity Sword as well. So I'm going to talk about some of the figurines that I have, and majority of these are actually from my son when he was just a kid. So he lost interest in them, he grew up already and so forth, so I will just talk a bit about them, because there's a lot of fans out there, kids and adults alike, who like these. They were made for about a few years, roughly from about 2008 to about 2011, I believe, 2012. And then they were transferred to be more into a play school level kind of figurines, and many characters were not available when they were sort of rebranded and made into a newer series. But this initial series had so many variations of some of the main characters like Hulk and so forth, and some of these chunkier characters I have right here, so I'm going to cover them today. So let's start with the larger Iron Man. These are much, as I said, much bigger size figures than the regular ones, and just for the sake of comparison, I will show you how the regular size ones look like. So let's say Cable here, next to the one of the versions of the Hulkbuster Iron Man. So this is roughly how these guys would look like. This being a chunkier, bigger version, and this being a more of a regular size. And how would the ladies look like beside, let's say, the chunkier one? And what I'm holding here is an Enchantress. So back to the Hulkbuster Iron Man here, or at least a version of him. He has a small piece that broke off here. I'll probably have to glue that if I can find it. One thing is that sometimes these figures, at least the small pieces on them, can be very fragile. Anyway, many of these characters and some of their variations do show up in the cartoon series as well, which was released around the same time, and the toy line was just to tie the whole thing in. And there was a few, as you noticed, a few games made as well for PS3, Xbox and such, and there was also some comics as well. There were also some comics and some one or two larger size figures, like a large size Iron Man who is made to look like from the Superhero Squad show. When it comes to the articulation, they were usually quite limited. It's sort of like you have a little PVC figurine that's more like a statue, but then again there was a bit of articulation at least. They could turn in the waist, in the case of Iron Man here, all the way, and he could turn his arms at the shoulder roughly that much. And of course, because his head is built right into the armor, he cannot turn his head. But other than that, the legs cannot move at all. In the majority of cases, or pretty much all of them, the legs are always static. They cannot be moved in any way. So the next one we have here would be the actual classic Hulkbuster Iron Man. The only pity is they did not mold his hands into fists. They're more outstretched, like he's trying to grab someone. The arms can rotate all the way around and in the waist as well. all the way around as well. The helmet cannot be opened, and there is also no articulation in the wrists or the arms at all, and of course the legs. A figure, this version of Hulkbuster Iron Man exists in so many different toy lines. It exists in Marvel Legends, in Marvel Select, and it's quite a popular version of Iron Man. And of course he's wearing this kind of armor when he's fighting Hulk. If Hulk gets out of line, then to be able to sustain the rage and the strength of Hulk, Tony Stark has to wear this kind of armor in order to stop him. And to compare the two of them side by side, so here is Hulk, and the Hulkbuster Iron Man is always a little bit smaller in size but equally bulky. So that's how they would look if they faced each other in a fight. And this is how he looks next to the other one, to the other version of Iron Man. Now, of course, there were many versions of Hulk made as well. We'll look into some of them. So this would be one version of Hulk. This is more of a savage version, I guess. Very little articulation, mostly the arms, and in his case the head can be moved, because unlike Iron Man he doesn't have any helmets or anything like that. So the head can pretty much rotate all the way around, and his arms can go all the way around too, almost all the way, because of the legs who are in the way. No articulation in the legs. Some of them are just pre-posed. Most of them are pre-posed like this, in other words, that either they're standing with their legs straight or they're crouching. And he does have waistline articulation. Another version of Savage Hulk who came in two variations. This is the green regular variation, and there is also a grey one that looks exactly the same as this figure, also holding a bent metal bar. Looks the same, except he's in the grey color. I don't have that particular one. I only have the regular one here, and as you can tell, he's holding a twisted metal construction bar in his hand, and he can move his arms all the way around, and there is a movement in the waistline yet again. And the head, in this case, because this is one of the early versions of Hulk from the early waves, he cannot move the head at all, so it's only the waistline and the arms. Now, one of the two versions of the Thing from Fantastic Four looks like this. Now, what's actually not so good about this figure is the fact that he's pre-sculpted to just give you a pose like he's getting ready for a fight, but you cannot take these arms apart. He's just stuck in a pose like this. It's still a nice figurine, but it lacks. It would be better, if all these figures were made in an action pose, meaning that they can have their arms outstretched or shaped like a fist or something like that, because when it's static like this, you cannot really do much with him. He's just standing like that and grinning and getting, obviously by making his hand in a fist, he's ready for a fight. But the thing is, you cannot do much with him, nothing. There is articulation in the waist. He's wearing his Fantastic Four short pants. No movements in the legs. And the head can turn. But since the arms are unable to turn, then it's kind of meaningless. There is another version of him where he's wearing long pants and his arms are apart, so at least that version is a bit better. Unfortunately, I don't have that variation, so only this one. Now the next one among the chunky fellas here, muscular big fellas, is this the character from the Brotherhood from the X-Men. He's a bad guy, and his name is Blob. Why is he named Blob? Well, for the very size of him, that he has a huge body mass that never goes down, so he never gets skinny or anything. And that bulk of his he uses in the fight against the X-Men. In his case, he can move his arms. There is no waist movement in his case, or the leg movement either. And his head cannot move left or right either. But at least one of his hands is shaped as a fist, so that he's ready for a fight. The other hand is more outstretched, like he's saying hello. Keep in mind that these figurines, that were specifically, they were aimed at children, at young children, so you cannot expect them to be absolutely great and that they have a great deal of articulation like, let's say, Marvel Legends would. So for the young fans, these figurines were ideal back in the day, so they would have a lot of fun using their imagination and having fights between good and evil. So it served its purpose, and the cartoon as well. Some people were, I remember some collectors were outraged that the Superhero Squad cartoon was just too ridiculous and all that, but they kept forgetting that cartoon series and these figurines, they were not really aimed at grown-up collectors, they were aimed at children. So, more interesting, of course, if you're an adult and a collector and you still like these figurines, that's fine. But predominant idea was to aim it at young fans, kids. So, enough about Blob, let's move on. Here we have Gladiator Hulk. Yes, it's pretty much the same kind of Gladiator Hulk as would be in the Ragnarok movie, except, of course, he's wearing a slightly different armor here. I mean, his helmet is the same, and unlike the hammer and an axe that he carries in the movie, here he only has an axe and a shield that are molded in his hands, and they cannot be moved. The left arm cannot move much. I mean, obviously it can, but it cannot go all the way around due to the shoulder pad that's molded on. Now, the other arm, however, can go all the way around. The helmet is not removable, it's molded on, and the head cannot move. Now, there is a waist movement in the waist, so he can rotate all the way around. No movement in the legs. And he has big, sturdy, oversized molded fists. And in the case of his wrists, he can't rotate them. So some of the figurines would end up with a little bit more articulation than others. As the line went on, some articulation was actually added onto the figures, while the early versions did not have it. So in his case, as you can see, he has articulated wrists. Now, the next version is King Hulk. Now, King Hulk is predominantly known to comic book readers and those who have seen or actually read the comics about the Gladiator Hulk, because in the comics he became a gladiator first, when he was exiled to a distant galaxy by the certain number of heroes from Earth who could not deal with his rage attacks and rage modes. So he was practically put in a spaceship, or actually, sorry, in a rocket, by Professor Xavier, Doctor Strange, Namor, I believe, and Black Bolt, the leader of the Inhumans, and they simply sent him into the space to simply float there and land anywhere else other than Earth. So he landed in a distant planet where he was imprisoned by the aliens there, a very powerful alien race, and he was used as a gladiator in their games. Of course, he managed to break free, and he became King Hulk, what you see in this other version of him. He's carrying a short sword, and his armor has somewhat changed. It still looks almost like a gladiator armor, but he has a type of circlet around his head, or like a low-level crown, and he proclaimed himself King Hulk because he defeated the tyrant of the planet where he was imprisoned and became their leader. And then, at least in the comics, he decided to land back on Earth and lead an attack on Earth to exact his revenge for being exiled. And that's pretty much what happened. He gathered all the forces in his newly acquired empire, proclaimed himself a king, and went back to Earth to seek revenge. So in the case of the figurine here, there is no trouble with any shoulder pad, so he can rotate his arm. There is also wrist rotation on both hands, and he can rotate the arms. The head can this time move. There is a movement in it all the way around, and the legs of course cannot. They are in a sort of a pre-crouch position. And the last one we have in this lineup that I will talk about today is Rhino, the enemy of Spider-Man. He is in a way again that moment when you have a pre-molded little figurine that cannot really move much, but as I said, I cannot complain too much because, as we know, it was aimed at a younger audience, but at least as a sort of a little mini statue, he looks great. He is getting ready to charge with his horn, and his arms are apart, and his muscles are bulging, and he's ready for the charge. In his case, the arms are pre-posed and molded onto the side of the body so that they cannot be moved. There is no shoulder movement anywhere, so he cannot rotate the arms, and of course no wrist movement either. Now he does have a waistline movement, but that only allows him up to a certain point to turn around, due to the fact that, at least as you can see, from right to left he can rotate, but then again if you try it from left to right, there is a bit of a problem, because his left arm hits right into the knee here, and he cannot move it any further. The head itself is also sculpted on so that there is no movement in it whatsoever, no movement in the neck, so he cannot turn his head left or right. And there is obviously, as usual, no articulation whatsoever in the legs. But compared to, let's say, Hulk, he is obviously the way he should be, even in comics, slightly smaller than Hulk. But as you can tell in some cases of the figurines, which is noticeable throughout the whole series, some characters would have very small heads, and then others would have huge bulging heads, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Some of the symmetry of the let's say legs, arms, and so forth, especially the heads, would be a bit off in regards to different characters, which is quite noticeable. But they were made to look a little bit cartoonish, obviously, and to look slightly like caricatures, and a bit deformed, because they would have proportionate bodies up to a point, and then you see these enormous fists or very large heads. But they still have their own charm the way they were done, and by the way they were made and produced by Hasbro Company, who at the present time and for a while now is making Marvel Legends and the Marvel, and for a period of time they used to make the Marvel Universe figures as well. So anyway, that is all for now as an introductory video to the Marvel Superhero Squad. I have a whole bunch more figures to talk about, and there is also one playset, but more about all of these next time, so it's to be continued. Thanks for watching. Bye.